discussion. Okay. Um, I think we should start with the minister, who is probably, no doubt, the hardest working minister in the country, although the health minister might have something to say about that characterization. Um, so, Minister, you've just been, through a few months of consultation on the parish primary school proposals. What was it like for you? And sort of give us an update of where we are now. What are some of the things that you've learned, listening to, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of people, give their views and about the proposals?
Again, welcome, Bermuda. What I would say that I have learned is that people do care about education. They care about what it is that our children will have the benefit of by remaining in public school education. That's not just the persons who find themselves with no other choice but to use education system, but that is the entire Bermuda, because if education succeeds, Bermuda succeeds. And so by having these open and honest conversations that we've had people who agree, we've had people who disagree. We've got people who like what we're doing but want to do things slightly different. And we've got other people who are still kind of trying to figure out where it is that we're going. Our purpose is to ensure that every single child that comes through the doors of the public education system receives an education that they can be proud of, one that gives them the tools to succeed, and one that ensures that they will be a productive citizen regardless of where they live, how much money their parents do or don't have, or what exceptionalities or special gifts that they do contain. And so for that, it's critically important for us to look at education from a holistic point of view and how we can create a more equitable system that provides all of our children and every single one of them with the tools to succeed. And so over this journey that we've undertaken, which has taken 2+ years of education reform, talking, holding meetings and consultation engagement sessions, what I have learned is that we need to always put our children first. We need to put the needs of our children first. Yes, we will have our own personal, and when I say us, I'm referring to us as adults, we'll have our personal memories, we'll have our personal understandings of what it is that happened when we were attending school, but the system we're building now is for those children, not only the ones that are in our schools now, but the ones that haven't even been born yet. We have to create a system that they can be proud of and we know that they're going to succeed in. So I do appreciate all of the conversations that we've had. It's opened my eyes to some things that I perhaps hadn't taken into account. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the conversations we've had, the hundreds of people we've talked to, the dozens of meetings that we've had, the hundreds of submissions that I've actually read, being stopped on the street, for people to voice their opinion, being called, being emailed. So I am very appreciative of everything that everyone has given us. But at the end of the day, the decisions that we do make have to be in the best interest of our children and our students that aren't even in our system yet that are to come. So if I would say that is what is the biggest thing that I've learned is that, we can all come together and build a system that will be sustainable and give our students the things that they need.
Did you actually read every single submission?
I did actually read every single submission. It was 130 plus, and I did read, but that's just the submissions that were submitted officially. There were also dozens of emails, Facebook messages sent to me, WhatsApp messages. So I did try my level best to read every single piece of documentation that was sent to me.
Awesome. So, Commissioner, you've also been intimately involved in the consultation. You've given, quite a few presentations yourself. Can you sort of sketch out what the parish primary proposals are and how do they fit into the overall picture of education reform?
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and good evening, everyone. Well, first of all, I think it's important for everyone to recognize that we are engaged in education reform. Education reform is well underway. And when we consider the shift from a 3-tier system to a 2-tier system, that brings with it specific changes. So as we make that shift and we move from the 3-tier to the 2-tier and we introduce the signature schools, it will also result in some changes at the primary school level. So we, have proposed to add those additional years on at the primary level. And in adding those years, we are certainly increasing the number of students, increasing the number of staff. But the question becomes, as we consider the future of our children, the fact that they deserve a world-class education, what will schools look like for our students moving forward? And so we have the parish primary school proposals. And so just in a nutshell, the proposal is to have one primary school per parish with 2 in Pembroke. But then we start to drill down, what does that look like for our young people? And it's a very, very exciting concept for them, because the proposal for parish primary schools focuses on the schools becoming the hub or the center of attention for their parish. It's about having everyone in that parish, the parents, the community partners, rallying around schools to ensure the success of students. Those partners, those individuals in the community, we anticipate that they will actually become integrated with the operations of the schools, and so that our children will have firsthand and relevant experiences with those who are running businesses. We want to develop a spirit of entrepreneurship within our young people. That should start very, very early. And so when we consider also our partners, we look at them enhancing what is taking place with the programs in the schools, providing professional development and services. So it's a really exciting model. I think one of the things that I've learned in listening, there are some individuals who have said, well, you know what, we already have parish primary schools. I would say we have schools in parishes right now who have some community support, but we're talking about a different concept. We're talking about parish primary schools that are based around a concept that is research-based, and again, that integrates the community within the fiber of the school.
Okay, so I'm thinking, thanks for that, Mrs. Richards. I'm thinking right now that, there's, some parishes have multiple schools, multiple primary schools. How did the ministry go about deciding how to sort of consolidate and end up selecting one site for a primary school in each parish? Can you give us what were the criteria when you say there was?
So there were, and we called them, there were a number of study factors. There was a team of experts who assisted the ministry in terms of identifying the study factors. And let me say that the goal was to identify locations or sites that could be developed to become these 21st century learning facilities for our young people. And so there were a number of criteria that were looked at to determine, the team looked at a number of criteria to determine which sites would be best. So let me start. There are some parishes, of course, that only have one school in the parish. And so the goal would be to develop those schools as parish primary schools. Where there were more than one, where there was more than one school, then criteria such as, and I have my listing here because I want to make sure that I'm giving accurate information. But we looked at building, that team looked at the building conditions. They looked at the land and property conditions. And under there were some specific things that were critical when we consider the vision for parish primary schools and expanded curricula for the primary schools. And so that team would have determined whether there was the capacity to develop, the actual site, whether there were any boundary restrictions, because as you know, as you expand, you can only go to within a certain distance from the boundary, whether, the amount of green space, because that's going to be critical. We want to have schools where we have those, they can expand, have the specialized rooms, but still leave adequate green space for recreation and for a robust sports program. So those were some of the key areas that were study factors that were considered.
Great, thanks.
I would just like to just to expand on that is And it is critical that people know what those criteria were, because they were very important. And it's very important for people to understand that the same criteria that was applied to every single school site across Bermuda. So there wasn't any special change. There wasn't any changes in that depending on what parish we went through. And so the idea was, as Ms. Richards stated, to determine the best possible site to provide the type of facility that could utilize the curriculum and what we're building for our children for a 21st century education. And so when we look at these school systems, as we'll get into and talk about the types of schools we want, it's imperative for us, especially as our adults, especially as adults here in Bermuda, to try and look beyond what we remember as a school. Remember, we are now looking for schools that have things that we didn't even dream of and couldn't have fathomed back then. We're talking about schools with cafeterias, schools with amphitheaters, schools with special rooms, quiet rooms for students to go in, what we call makers rooms for students to go and just experiment, specific rooms for teachers to go and work on their lesson plans, do the professional development, outdoor classrooms, parking that's parking and busing systems that are within the school grounds. So we're not talking about blocking traffic as we're dropping children off, so different things like that. This is what we want people to really truly comprehend when we're talking about schools of the future. So in some ways, we're asking them to kind of remember what you had, what we had when we were growing up, but what we're looking to go for is something completely different. So don't think of our expansion or our school reform under the same guise of what it is that you had and just a little bit better. We're talking about a completely new model.
It's like a revolution.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Let's lead the revolution so our children are the beneficiaries.
Absolutely. I love revolutions,
Yes. And Mr. Johnson, it might be a good time to put some of the sample learning spaces on the screen so that our viewers can have a look.
I will do that. Okay, so you spoke about green space and outdoors, and I do have an image. Well, the first image that comes up is this one. Can you all see that? So that's an outside classroom. Do you want to say something about that, Mrs. Richards?
Yes, I can. What we want to do is to ensure that our students are engaged in meaningful and relevant learning experiences. And we want our students to go outside of the classroom, outside using Bermuda as the classroom, but this just happens to be an example of an outside garden where we would want our children to learn about growing and cultivating various plants and vegetables. But we want to take it further than that. I mean, and some of our children are experiencing this now where they're growing and then they have an opportunity to donate to seniors' homes, but also to sell their products. As I stated earlier, we want our children to recognize that they have talents and gifts and interests, but also that they can become entrepreneurs. So we want to develop that entrepreneurial spirit within our children from a very early age.
Right. Tanya Stafford, you had your hand up. Are you coming as a planner or as an educator?
Oh, I'm coming as a human being who has experience in all of those things. I've taught in the oldest classroom in Bermuda, the old house called Verdmont. And I'm so excited to hear about teaching outside. When I was the National Trust Education Officer, our program was about experiential learning. So we took children into spaces and we taught them there. I've also taught in some awful spaces. There's not been good ventilation. I vividly remember some spaces where on humid days the walls were wet. This is not what we need as we move forward. We need all of our children to be in safe spaces. We need all of our children to really be at the center of our communities again. I actually left education in the 1980s, I left a community school, the Whitney Institute. And I did that because the last restructuring, I am that old, the last restructuring was taking away the community element, in my opinion. And the one senior secondary school, which then became two, was, in my view, losing all of the connectedness that young people need to thrive. We have to be connected to our sports clubs. We have to be connected to our working men's clubs. We have to be connected to our churches. And I honestly do feel that what I have heard is taking us back to that. So I'm excited to be here this evening.
Great. So you're quite familiar with the proposals, correct? What? Yeah.
Absolutely. I took time to read them.
Good. What were some of the things that impressed you about it?
I think we're right sizing the education system. I honestly believe that if you right size, you will have the children in spaces that are correct for them. And to do that, you really want to make a purpose-built space. I'm living in the northwest of England at the moment, and the primary schools that I see here look like the one on the screen. The children are the size of the spaces they are in. What has tended to happen, I think of some of our schools, and I really have been in a lot of them because I was a pupil as well. And so many of our schools have long, long corridors. They're not safe spaces for children. Children should be in learning spaces. They should be easily able to be supervised. Teachers should not be isolated in rooms with children. Teachers should always have a colleague right across a doorway. Suppose somebody, I have had it happen. I've had a teacher when I was the head of secondary have a heart attack. A little year 7 girl had to run up to me and say, we need help. We got help. We survived the crisis. But had that person been in a more modern bit of our school, actually, they wouldn't have been as isolated. And it's all of those things that I think, from what I'm reading, from what I'm hearing, I know the planning department can be effective and help. I think we can really bring the children into the right sort of spaces that the community can then use. I mean, you can go there in the evening and have yoga or whatever, but let's make this back to the hub of the community. So that's what I'm excited about, IO.
Thanks. So what are we looking at now, Mrs. Richards?
Well, we're multi-purpose room and a learning space of the future. This is what we envision for our students. You will notice color will be intentional as we plan. Lighting will be intentional. The way that the learning space is organized will be intentional, and it will be flexible as well for our children. And so you can imagine as a child, even as a teacher, going into this type of learning space and how uplifting it would be, how motivating it would be as well. And of course, technology would be available and play a key role in the learning spaces of the classrooms that we envision moving forward.
Great, thanks. So just want to address our audience again. If you're on the government's Facebook, feel free to ask any questions, make any comments you want, and we will have them addressed. I understand there might be, the comments may not be enabled on YouTube, but somebody's working on that right now. But this is Io Johnson, and I am with the Minister and the Commissioner of Education. So I'm just going to go through this another room in the, what's it called, a maker's room?
This is the maker's room. This is the room for innovation, Mr. Johnson. This is really exciting because if you can think about it, our children will be able to collaborate, to take their ideas, to bring them to fruition, and to come into the maker's room and to just produce. Again, we talked about becoming entrepreneurs, to take what they have produced and hopefully to actually market those items to earn some funds coming from those, and then to put some funds back into the school. But again, just, encouraging students to have great vision, to be innovative and creative, and also to, again, develop that spirit of entrepreneurship.
Hmm.
And, and interestingly, just going back to that,
Yeah.
we have such creative young people in Bermuda. At Whitney, I was lucky enough to teach, and I know you know him, Io, Milton Repose. We have young people who have gone forward. Rebecca Falconbury, now she was at BHS. We have Darren Johnson. We have Ed Christopher's sons. We have so much innovation. Lucy Sperling. Look at how much film working is happening in Bermuda. And it is because our children are that creative. So they deserve these spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have these spaces growing up, Minister?
No.
What did your playground look like?
It did not look like that. I know I looked youthfully young, but primary school ended in the early 80s.
Right.
But no, we did not have that. But I do have a very, very fond memory of my days at Indian primary, for sure, as a primary school student. And as we talk about our schools, yes, they were built for a time, and as we move forward with the differences in what our children need to be successful within their own island, we also have to change with the time. We also have to recognize that we have to change with the time. This doesn't mean wholesale throwing out of everything that we have the value and everything that has led to where we get to this point. But it also means that we cannot allow the weights of the past to prevent us from moving on to the next level, because our children deserve that.
Tell us, I mean, talking about the past though, tell us how, I know there's been some concern in the community about history and legacy.
Yes.
Tell us the connection between, the legacy issues and what we're doing now. How much of history has impacted the decision to make the steps that we're taking now?
Well, that is a really excellent question, Io. Based on the feedback that we have received, I can say hand over heart that there is a lot of pain in our community about, and some of the legacies of the racist activities of the past still linger with us today, and they still actually play a role in why some of our schools or our system has inadequacies within it. We are looking to break that legacy, that part of that legacy, but we also have to figure out how to respect it, how to tell it, how to ensure that people understand that this is how we got to where we got to, and use that as a platform into further greatness for our students. And so that is one thing that we have grappled with. As you would know, as we've conducted discussions with persons in the community to give us historical narratives of our various schools throughout the island. And that is from St. George's through Somerset. There's a rich legacy, there's a rich history, and there's a rich culture that exists there. We, part of the consultation and engagement that we have, has pointed out to us that we have to come up with a way of honoring that legacy, honoring that history, and honoring that culture as we move forward. We're not talking about moving forward and forgetting where we've come or what we've done, but we're talking about moving forward and using what we've gone through, what we've learned, what has happened over the years to make a better, more equitable school system for all.
So, Ms. Stafford, you got your hand up. What's up?
And when I look back at my own experience in school, and I look back at myself as a pupil, and I look back at myself as a teacher, and then I look back at myself as an administrator, I have been very, very lucky because I was able to go to quite a few schools. My father worked on ships, so we moved quite a lot. But also I taught at the Berkeley Institute. And I think that is a place where I saw huge legacy. But the legacy is the stories of the people who have succeeded. And I really feel that an appropriate curriculum can tell the Bermudian history in a way that wasn't accessible to me when I taught Bermuda history at the Berkeley Institute. But we now have the storytellers, we have the people who are making the films, that our young people can learn the legacy of what happened to get them to the new schools that they are going to be learning in. You don't lose the stories. You don't need to place them in those buildings for them to know those stories.
And also, I mean, I think one of the things I was trying to get at was the fact that the history of racism and segregation has actually left us schools that are not equitable across the board, are they? I mean, you know, some schools are far more better endowed than other schools, and isn't that part of sort of like the basic, one of the basic principles around this, correct, Mr. Minister?
I would have to agree with you. When I look at, especially listening to the stories that we heard, you know, part of the great legacy and history of our schools is how much people fought to create equality. You know, just to say we should have what everyone else has, and we want to bring that. We want to have a system that doesn't leave anyone behind. A system that provides those with whatever they bring to the table, the ability to enhance that. And become, as we keep saying, productive citizens once they pass through our system.
Right.
We have to acknowledge that. We have to figure out a way to incorporate that within our curriculum, within our society even. When we talk about this, we're not just talking about our schools. We're talking about our sports club. We're talking about, you know, our workmen's clubs. We're talking about the associations within our various parishes. We're talking about, and as we've been talking about this, it's actually been much bigger. It's been a much bigger thing than just our school. And it is something that we intend to address as we move forward, because we have to address it. We have to be the generation that says, we're not going to tolerate this anymore. We're going to do what needs to be done to ensure that our children have the best that they can, that they deserve as we move forward, especially when it comes to education.
Great. Okay, there are some comments coming in now. Thank you, everybody, on Facebook and YouTube. We've got 3 comments, questions. There's a teacher on YouTube saying this sounds really inspirational. So that's pretty positive. Before I read the other questions, Minister, you might want to, somebody's saying that your audio is a little bit low on YouTube, so I don't know if you can adjust it on your end. Tech people are saying that you need to sort of up your volume if you can, or just
not without looking away from the camera, but I will attempt to talk a lot louder. I will talk a lot louder.
Just a bit louder, yeah, great, thank you. So now here's a serious question here. As we move forward, will the ministry look at having class sizes smaller and allow for a more intimate setting for learners? Commissioner, what's going to happen in terms of the class size?
In the proposal that was developed, we actually are looking at class sizes with a ceiling of 15 students, so 1 adult to 15 students. So when we compare that ratio to what we have now, we're looking at smaller class sizes as we move forward with parish primary schools.
Great, so that's a yes. And the other question is, how much input will teachers have in designing their assigned classrooms?
Thank you so much for that question. I'm so glad it was asked. We want to, all of our educators and our school leaders to know that they will have the input and have an opportunity to share with us what classrooms, I would say what learning spaces will look like. And so that process has already started. There are some individuals who have already been trying out some different learning spaces and who have involved teachers in our system. And so as we move forward, we will continue to involve our educators, but also we would like to have the input of our students and the input of our parents as well as we consider the learning spaces. Now, what I do want to underscore is that as we gather that input, we will have to integrate it with the research around what appropriate learning spaces look like. We'll have to incorporate the science as it relates to lighting and all of that, the environment, and perhaps, Ms. Stafford might be able to say a bit more there. So it will be a merging of not only the minds, but it will be a merging of the minds and the research. But definitely teachers, educators, parents, students will be involved. And that's the exciting thing about this process. And I think this is what makes it different from education reform in the past. The process that is being used is one that is highly engaging, and it is bringing in our key stakeholders.
Just before you step in, Ms. Stafford, if you were, and I know it's something that the commissioner does value as well. We're not just, and we're talking about everyone that works in the school. We take input. We're taking input from the custodians,
absolutely,
from the administrators, everything that we've done. We try to incorporate as many people as possible to come and give us what their ideas are. I think one of the biggest things that surprised me was I was at one of the grocery stores, and one of the packers was there. They're from a middle school, and they're like, "You're the Minister of Education. I remember when you guys asked questions about signature schools and asked us our opinion." And I really appreciated that, because that's where I'm going to be in a couple of years doing that. So that's the type of feedback that we're getting, because we are committed to being collaborative with and engaging in what it is that we're moving from. And so there is always room for anyone out there that wants to come and have those discussions. You just got to come and have those discussions. But we will continue to bring that engagement to the public as much as we need to as well. But anyone can fire up an email. They can get involved in Learning First. You'll find things for you to do. We just want you to be involved, because at the end of the day, this is a school system that you, from Mr. and Mrs. Bermuda, have to trust, have to believe in, and have to have the confidence that your children are going to be in good hands when you send them off to school.
Great. I was going to ask you, how can the community get involved, but I think you've already answered that. What are your thoughts, Ms. Stafford?
Well, firstly, to the teacher, how wonderful that you're listening. I think that's fantastic. And I have never met a teacher that cannot customize the space with very little resources. Teachers are some of the most resourceful people I know. And I believe that one of the nice things about these multi-purpose spaces is it will allow that customization to happen. Because when you're working with a group of children, you do project your own personality. And that is one of the things when I see students, and I have people I taught who are now MPs, and they can remember certain lessons of mine. And it is very much a partnership between the school, the teacher, the children, the home that we want to build. The other thing I would say as well, putting my other hat on, my town planner hat, this is an exciting opportunity to build 21st century buildings. It's going to take a while. Don't expect a brand new one in every parish immediately. But when you see that first school, the schools that haven't yet got them are going to want them. And I think this is what is exciting about this, is it is an opportunity to bring all of the modern lighting systems, to bring modern ventilation systems. The reason we have mold in schools is because they weren't built to be air conditioned. But now, because of climate change, we have to air condition our schools.
Yeah.
So we can solve all of these environmental problems which interfere with the safety of the school community simply by starting at the beginning and getting it right. So that's what I would say.
That's your planucator hat on.
Yes.
The educator and the planner. Wow. I thought you were going to have to take one off, put another one on, but you didn't do that.
Oh, no.
You combine it all.
Well,
I'm not,
interestingly, if I
yeah.
may just say, thinking about that, the only reason I became a planner was because the late 80s school
Mm.
reform did not seem to me, and I had just got a master's in education management and organization in
Wow.
schools. And I came back and I heard they wanted to build one senior secondary school. And I thought, well, that won't work. We were having trouble at Whitney. We had an element that was growing that was difficult. That's the only way I can think to describe it. And we had
Right.
teachers who weren't coping. So let's just put all the kids in all the schools into one place. It seemed like a great idea. And I am being sarcastic. It was not a good idea. And because of that, I got the opportunity to become a planner. And now I get the opportunity to bring that, which I do have a passion for, back to education. So
Yeah.
I feel very privileged that the minister actually met me as a planner before he knew that,
You're
hey, he
ever in
said to me one
education.
day, I hear you used to be a school teacher. Yes, I did. And I still am.
That's awesome. So we might have time to talk about the signature school concept because I think that's all tied into where we're going. But I want to go to the audience questions,
Mhm.
and I really thank the few people who've already asked questions. There are one, two, three, four. Are you going to bring somebody from YouTube? Are you going to bring in a robust school inspection system to improve outcomes? It's an interesting one. Is that what are we doing in that score in terms of, making sure schools are doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Well, I think I could answer that, and also I know the commissioner is chomping at the bit to answer that one as well. It is critical for us to have a system that is accredited, and that accreditation will be something that's done, whether it's an international accreditation or something that is done locally. But I know the commissioner when she first came on, we talked about how do we get our schools accredited to an international standard, because it's something that she did at Cedar Bridge. And Cedar Bridge is
Mm.
accredited to an international standard. And it's something that we are committed to doing for our entire system as we move forward, with this. But I will then open it up to the commissioner, because I know that's her bailiwick, and she can really talk about that a lot more than I can.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Johnson, I was so caught up in listening to the minister. Would you share the question with me again, please?
It's a question about school inspection system to improve outcomes.
Well, I think what I'd like to share at this point is that as we move forward, we will be very specific about the standards that will be expected from our students, our parents, our educators, from the
Yeah.
department staff as well. And as our minister talked about, we will be looking to pursue accreditation. However, what I would tie into there is also the issue or the matter of accountability. I know
Right.
someone's talked about inspections, and when I think of inspections, I think of Ofsted, of course, going in, looking at specific criteria, etc. I know that we will focus on outcomes and setting targets that we would expect our schools to reach, our students to reach. And so I think as we move forward, what I would like for everyone to understand is that we will look at a system-wide, an accountability system for the Bermuda Public School System. It's very much needed. It will, get us all working towards the same targets and outcomes. But definitely, as the minister said, accreditation for the system is a goal, and also looking at also having programs become programs of distinction. We have some fantastic teachers in the areas of the arts and art and music and etc. And looking at even getting specific programs within our schools accredited as well. So some very exciting times are ahead. And I want us to see accountability and accreditation in a positive light. So it's about setting this target, working towards it, and celebrating as we achieve, what has been set out. Ms. Stafford, you wanted to add something?
One thing I would also like to add, I'm now putting my private education hat on. I think there's strong possibilities to really network between the public and the private schools. As a debate adjudicator, I have seen teams of students from Cedar Bridge, from the Berkeley Institute, from BHS, from Warwick Academy, wherever, and they come together, and the children, the young people, I often judge middle school because apparently I'm nice. You can be a bit tougher with the senior students. And what happens is they support each other. They want to see each other succeed. And I feel that one of the things that the reform has the ability to do is to perhaps remove some of this belief in, if I can use the term, them and us, because when these young people work together, they are unstoppable. And I really would encourage that as well.
Great. I'm not sure if you've mentioned this, Commissioner. When you talked about the primary school, one school per parish, I know that one of the plans is to have the preschool attached to the same site.
Yes.
Why is that? Can you elaborate on that as well?
Absolutely. When we consider the research around transitions for students, we know that when children transition, very often there's a bit of a slump sometimes in there, or can be a bit of a slump in terms of their performance with their adjustment. And if you think about what we have in place now, so students enter the preschool. They then leave there, they enter the primary school. They leave there, they enter the middle school. They leave there, they enter the senior school. So that's, that's 4 transitions. So we're saying we want to see the preschools as part of our primary schools, parish primary schools. So when a student enters at the preschool level, the student will then exit to enter the senior signature level. So we will have reduced the transitions. We will have helped to, students to be in very stable and consistent environments. So it's all about the transition and all about aligning as well. I mean, it's about a lot of things, but aligning the curriculum as students move through, we talked about the parish primary schools, getting students ready for signature schools and starting that very early down in primary school. So some really exciting times lie ahead, but it's all about reducing the number of transitions for students.
Sorry, Stafford, do you want to add something to that?
Yes, and I was just thinking as Mrs. Richards was speaking, keeping children in one space allows the strengthening of sibling links as well. And do not underestimate that. Little children see their older siblings, cousins, it doesn't matter who you are, but if you're on the same site for a longer period of time, you actually support the family as well.
Yeah, I'd never thought of that, actually. Question from Facebook. Will school entry age change? Anybody?
I'll leave that one for the commissioner. I'll leave that one for the commissioner. It is something that we are talking about. Obviously, if we're moving the preschools onto the campuses, the preschool at the moment is at 4 years old with the Bright Start program experimenting, well, not experimenting, but looking at how we can bring 3-year-olds on. But as we talk about our reform, we're talking about primary school now going from P1 through to P8, so incorporating 8 years of schooling at the primary level. And then you got the preschool prior to that. So in terms of lowering the age, I'm not sure the exact question because the mandatory school age right now is 5. Right. Referring to, and I do know that we do get requests on every now and then about persons who are turning 5, but after the cutoff date, and can they be allowed to come into the system? So that is something that will have to be looked at as we move forward. So there's not something that we can commit to, that I can commit to at this particular moment, but it is part of looking at how we can reform the school system.
And I would just add to that, you know, we've had some, what I would say, informal discussions around this, about the entry age for children. We really want to ensure that students have a strong foundation, because we recognize the success that will come from that strong foundation. And so as we move forward, I can say that we will have discussions with our key stakeholders around that, but we'll also be very careful about looking at the research, you know, and what it tells us. We're not going to reinvent the wheel, and we're not going to do anything that's detrimental. We always want to be doing things that will benefit our young people.
Yeah.
And if I can just add on to that, if you get primary education right, it makes everything that follows so much easier. And this is why I'm so supportive of you starting with primary school reform. Because if you do not get the basics correct, it's incredibly difficult to play catch up later. So it's exciting that you're starting where you are.
Great, thanks. Another comment on YouTube. As a head of school working in the UK, I would encourage a ministry to ensure that buildings are financially sustainable so that you can ring fence more of your budget for teaching and learning. Does that resonate with you? Financial sustainability of the buildings?
Of course, it definitely resonates, for sure. It definitely resonates. And one of the things that, you know, when we look at what we're trying to do is we've recognized that we have 18 primary schools that at one point serviced nearly twice as many students than what we have in them now. However, the cost of running those 18 schools has not come down as the student population has come down. And so what we find ourselves with is a finite budget that has to now be stretched between 18 schools that realistically can go down to parish primary schools as we are proposing. But there are some people in our community that look at this as, oh, this is a great way for you to spend less on education. I have disappointing news for them. This is a way for us to take the budget we have and spend it more efficiently on education to ensure that our students have what they need, as Ms. Stafford said earlier. Okay. So our teachers have what they need, and so our schools have what they need. And so those funds that you are now spending on 18 schools will be realistically spent on 10 schools. And so, yes, that's how we get more value for money. That's how we have more sustainable school system as we move forward. You know, when I look at it, it's a win-win situation for our children. And at the end of the day, that's what we're looking to have, a win-win situation for our children so they can have the things they need.
What do you want to add to that, Ms. Stafford?
I was also going to say that looking at the larger agenda for government, I guess I've got my planner hat back on again. We know climate change is a real thing, and this is a chance to get the eco schools built so that they will be more sustainable to maintain by putting in the technology that now exists at the right moment. It's always hard to add technology on, whether it's air conditioning systems, heating systems, should we ever need them, we won't, and all of those things. So if you can get them in the beginning, then you future-proof your school. And exactly, I agree 100% with the person. Your budget, the biggest part of your budget has to go on your human resources, not on your buildings.
Okay, there's another question from Facebook. I'm not quite sure if I understand it. So whoever's asking this question, you might want to elaborate on it a bit. But they're saying it's really a question around implementation. And they go, if the changes take years to implement in all parishes, that process might result in inequity. So they're sort of talking about how do we go about developing it if it's all staggered? Is that something? I mean, we're not even there yet, really. But well, what do you think of that, Minister?
Can you repeat that, Io? I didn't quite catch.
Well, I don't quite understand it myself, but I think the sense is, if the changes take years to implement, you know, in each of parishes, it might result in inequity between school sites, you know. So it's a question of, you know, it really is about an implementation question, you know, and whether, you know, if we don't have all the capital resources to do it in a reasonable amount of time, you know, then that might result in a sort of inequity situation. Now, I know you probably have a sort of some creative ideas as to how it can be done in a reasonable amount of time, given. But what do you have to say to that? That as a specific potential challenge?
And actually, there's a huge challenge, and it's one that that we do intend to tackle head on. The part about the parish primary schools is the decision hasn't been made yet, despite so some of our detractors saying that decisions were made months ago, and we're just going through the motions. The decision hasn't been made yet, and this is something that we are wrestling with. But once the decision has been made, that will then give us an opportunity to now look at how that transition is going to work. That will involve us bringing in a project planner and a project programmer that will actually sit down and come up with the best possible way for us to move forward. We recognize that we can't go out and immediately rebuild 10 schools at the same time. It's just not realistic. And we understand that there's going to have to be a transition that is 3 to 6 years in time. But the purpose of having a program manager in place is to ensure that there is the least amount of disruption, the least amount of inequity as that transition does take place. And so that is a critical part of it. So it's a really good question, Io, because it's a critical part of how we move forward. Because we are saying we need to put what we need to put in place because we want to decrease inequity, but we cannot produce inequity while we're getting to that point. So it will be a process that our stakeholders will be very much advised of. They will be part of that. We'll continue the engagement sessions so people will know. And I also want to point out that the decision that we're talking about in terms of the parish primary school will not take place until at a minimum after the 22-23 academic year. That's when you'll start to see some of those movements. So we're not talking about something that is going to happen tomorrow. If the decision is made today, we're going to start in September. That's not it, because as that person has pointed out, there has to be careful planning as we move forward with this to ensure that we get this right. That is the most critical thing, is we have to get this right. We don't want to have a situation that we just came through in the mid-90s, where we had the middle school system pushed in, and we listened to the persons who came online and talked about how traumatic that process was and how it just didn't make sense and how people were just so confused. That's not what we want. We have to plan this right, and we will plan it right. And we will take as much time as we need to ensure that the transition happens properly. And remember these key words. If you don't listen to me say anything else, remember this. Everything that we do has to be for the benefit of our students, period. They have to be for the benefit of our students.
Great. Okay. So, Ms. Stafford, did you have a comment? I think we have about 5 minutes.
A very brief comment. The same thing actually happens within a school. I was lucky enough, I suppose, to be at BHS as the head of secondary when we were doing a few things. We were introducing the new International Baccalaureate curriculum, but we were also building a gym. And I can tell you that when the Jesse Visa Sports Center was built, there was a lot of envy from English and maths and other departments within the school. And what happens, a school is a living thing. It doesn't just stop. And so what happens, I mean, BHS has just opened, sadly, I haven't got to see it because I'm not in the country, but they've just opened the Innovation Center. And so the school changes and it grows as the community needs grow. For the children to be very well prepared, they need to meet the needs of the community, because that's how you get success. You get success by being given at the school stage all of the opportunities and the resources being properly laid around you, that you can then leave that school and become a successful citizen.
Yeah.
So, when I was there, we were building a gym. Did I think we should build an innovation center? Not then. But now the innovation center is exactly the right thing for the school. So I suppose to say perhaps to the person, you can't have complete equity unless you really, really are starting from scratch. The schools that are later in the line, they'll actually get some good new things that the first school won't get. So I guess it swings and roundabouts.
Yeah. There are a couple of questions on social media, and I did promise that I will make sure they all get heard. Okay, so let's go to them now. Facebook. I understand one of the schools chosen. I should stop there and say nothing's been decided yet, but one of the schools chosen is Harrington Sound School. That school has had all sorts of issues with bugs and birds. There are why can't the birds eat the bugs though? Sorry, there are multiple steps, not much green space, and the drop-off and collection of kids is a nightmare. Yet Elliott Primary, which is open, spread out better, had a courtyard conducive for the garden, and outside learning was not selected. It has a space to go up if more classes are required. I do not understand the decision. Can you explain, please?
I will take that one, Io. First of all, I want to reiterate that decisions haven't been made. These were suggestions. And I also need persons to understand that each parish was evaluated on its own, because we can't compare parishes to parishes, because we have to talk about the schools that lie within those particular parishes. And so that's how the process went forth. And as the commissioner talked about earlier, there were criteria that were put in place to compare. All of the schools were compared identical. But then they were said, okay, let's take the schools within each parish and compare them to each other. And then that's how we came up with the various proposals that were put forth. The feedback or engagement sessions was to receive information from the public on what those proposals were. If there was if there were criteria that related to the consultation document that we put out that persons wanted us to have another look at, or they felt that should have been looked at differently. And so that's where we find ourselves, because we had a consultation document that had criteria defined within it. When we went out to the public was asked for alternatives based on the criteria. We've received suggestions, and we've received alternatives, not necessarily based on the criteria that all schools were judged by. And so that's where we're having, to go back and say, hey, Kay, let's look at this. But at the end of the day, we are committed to the criteria. We're committed to putting the best possible picking the best possible school sites within each parish for redevelopment into the schools that we want. And so with Harrington Sound, as this person has articulated, they are the only school in Smith's Parish. So we had nothing else to compare it to within Smith's Parish. So that's the school that we will take and redevelop. In Devonshire, we had Elliott, we had Prospect Primary, and we had another site that we looked at. And so we had to compare all of those sites. But again, reiterate, decision hasn't been made yet. And two, that although the criteria was the same across the island as all schools were compared, it was when you got onto the individual parishes that criteria had to then compare the schools within the parishes together. I just wanted to say that to explain how the proposals came about. So just to clarify to persons who may be thinking why one school in one parish and another school in another parish when they seem to be relatively along the same.
Okay, I do have a thesis and a question from Miss Arlene Brock. And I know if I don't include this, but I'm going to summarize. I'm going to go right to the question instead of the thesis. Please answer this question, she says. Given the facts that West End School A has a strong non-racist legacy, B has already been the community hub you envision, C is only 0.03 to 0.05 acres smaller than primary, Somerset Primary. Explain why the West End School is not fully able to offer the 21st century facility and wonderful learning spaces you're speaking of, with cafeteria, teachers' rooms, makers' rooms, etc. Outdoor classrooms seems to be the ideal future site in addition to continue its traditional role as a place of pride, community, belonging, aspiration. And that's been one of the areas of tension, correct, in
Yep.
your
Yeah.
submissions?
I would say that has been one of the areas. Yes, I would agree with you. That's been one of the areas of contention. Just a slight correction. The difference in the difference in acreage is not, I believe you said 0.03. It's actually around 1.1, 1.2 acres. So there's just a slight correction on that part. And as I previously explained in the previous answer, is we are looking at the site that is most suitable to be redeveloped for a school that our children deserve. Wow, and as we spoke earlier in the conversation, the consultation and engagement sessions we have really pointed out to us and really put an emphasis on the historical legacy and culture of our various parishes. And yes, that is something that also has to be respected and figured out how we address that. And I know that we have had multiple discussions with the proponents of West End. We've had discussions with persons who look at the proposal and think it's a great proposal for the parishes, and especially out of the Somerset community. We've had persons who don't believe it is. But at the end of the day, the decisions that we have to make have to take into account what is best for our students, what is best for the future generation. And we also have to balance that with addressing the legacy of racism, the legacy of inequity that has brought us to the point of where we want to reform. We also have to take into account the trauma and the disappointment that some of our, especially our elder generation, have felt being forced to go to schools that may not have not been given the opportunity to blossom, may not have been given the technology, may not have been given the resources that they rightly and richly deserve to have had if we had a truly equitable system. We understand that. I understand that. The team here understands that, and we recognize that we need to strike a balance between that. But at the end of the day, we also have to take into account what our children deserve, what they need, and what is best for them in the future generations that are to come and that will attend the Bermuda public school system.
You know, I have to say something though. It was really interesting. I had a conversation today about, some of the schools in the West and some of the schools in the East. And, it turned out there's quite a few people who are like West End alumni, very supportive of that legacy, sent their children to Somerset Primary. So I thought it's not as cut and dried as it seems. It's quite a nuanced situation, isn't it?
It certainly is. One thing that we have, and this is not us. This is not me, blaming anyone in particular, but we have seen, oddly enough, the enrollment at one school declined over the years, and the enrollment at another school declined, but not as fast. And so it really is curious. It really does make a interesting conundrum that we're seeing what we are seeing, but the enrollment at the school at the various schools hasn't kind of aligned with what we're seeing. But that's neither here or there. That part is actually neither here or there for me, Io. As I said, we had a criteria to pick what is the best possible site to be redeveloped into a school that our children deserve.
Okay, Ms. Stafford, we've got to be quick now because we've got 4 more comments on Facebook.
Okay, I'll be as quick as I can. I did live briefly in Somerset. I was also planner for the Western parishes. And I taught at the Berkeley with a lot of people with very strong connections to West End Primary. They came on to become Berkeleyites. And one thing I know, and I know Miss Brock, it is an incredibly resilient group of people. And in the perfect world, the minister would be able to pick 10 brand new pieces of land to put schools on. It's always easier to build on a new site. And as a planner, we simply have not got that land available in Bermuda. It does not exist. But what I would encourage, I obviously have no idea which schools are going to be chosen, but I have lived most recently in St. George's. I've volunteered, particularly at East End Primary. I know people from St. George's Prep, another area of contention. But I would really encourage the communities to see the goal is to come back to parish schools. How wonderful is that? We can get all the legacy, all the strength, all the support for all of the children who live in the parish, all of them.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, thanks a lot. Can we go to, I'm going to combine two questions from Facebook, and it's about the early years for you, Commissioner. Will preschool be legislated, and will the Bright Start program be implemented in more schools?
I'll answer the second question first. The Bright Start program was implemented first in Warwick Preschool, and we are looking to expand that into 4 preschools this year. As it relates to whether the age 3-year mandatory preschool, those discussions, as I said, and we talked about that a little earlier, we'll have to have discussions around that. We'll have to look at the research around that. We'll have to look at it within the context, of course, of Bermuda. So we will be reaching out, and we invite our key and critical stakeholders to get involved in those conversations.
Great. Minister, the next two, I think, are for you. This is from YouTube. What are some of the potential barriers, pitfalls identified that might impact the success of this project? How have you planned to mitigate or remedy them?
Okay.
Yeah.
Of course, some of the pitfalls. What we really want is the community to be behind and fully moving forward. And one of the pitfalls that we see is there will remain pockets of persons who will just not be happy and not take into account that we're doing what we're doing because we want our children to be successful. And so that it'll be really up to us to kind of continue to engage, continue to talk to those pockets as we move forward. The other pitfalls is we have buildings. Our youngest building is just under 50 years old. We have extremely old buildings that are creaking under the weight of what we call 21st century learning that needs to occur within our buildings. The pitfall is persons becoming impatient at the pace of how we move forward with this. And we've already stated that we're talking about between 3 and 6 years once we start. And we're not starting within, but for another 2 years at least of moving forward with this. So that is the pitfall. Those are the 2 really big things I see. I see nothing but positives as we move forward with this. We have a dedicated team that is doing things differently than what we did before. We are committed to engaging with the public, and we want the public to engage with us. So I think we have some of the criteria to be extremely successful, but there is always those unknown factors that I did mention that could prove to be bigger barriers than what they should be as we move forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. I want just asking our tech people in the background to let us know how much time do we really have, because I know it's after 7 already, and there are 2 questions. Anyway, I'll just read the first one. The UK provides official development assistance. ODA, Montserrat, St. Helena and Pitcairn have already, benefit from this assistance. Can we get some, and are we asking? I know Bermuda's considered in a different league, right? But can we just, take advantage of our colonial status and go cap in hand?
Well, I I guess that one is for me. It's not something that has come up, but it is something that we can explore as we move forward. What we really need to do is get to a point where we have concrete uh, financial numbers, and that also has to come with that transition plan that we talked about. So when we started on this, we had a lot of people saying, "Well, how much is it going to cost, and how long it's going to take?" And those are legitimate questions. However, it is difficult for us to really nail that down until one, a decision has been made, until two, we talk about what the transition plan will look like. And then we'll be able to come back with concrete numbers. So the idea is make the decision on the direction we want to go, bring that project programmer and the project manager on board. They will then help us to develop the plan moving forward, as well as what the capital project will look like and how it can be implemented. Then we'll start having more concrete numbers and things like that that we can actually pull together. So as it stands now, we haven't decided, we decided, and quite purposely, not to go down that route, because what we don't want to do is get people excited about a number that may go up or come down. And so, and because the schools all still need to be completely evaluated from a structural point of view, what can be, what is going to be on those sites. And each school is actually different. And each school actually has a different thing that needs to be looked at. And so we made the decision that it is impractical for us to actually go and actually do that type of in-depth structural evaluations until we get to the point where we say, well, this is the site that is most available for redevelopment or best for redevelopment. Now let's see what needs to happen on that site. And so, but going to the UK, as you say, cap in hand, is something that surely we can consider as we move forward. I'm sure a lot of our locals would be happy for us to do that, to say, hey, get them to help pay for something here as well.
Final question from Facebook. Thank you, Minister, for that. How will you deal, this is about St. David's, how will you deal with cars and bike drop-off times for the kids? If all kids from St. David have to go to St. George's to school, if children have been walking to school for years, so people from St. David will have to drive St. George's first before work and then pick up kids after work. Can they build a school by double dip? I don't know how you're going to answer that one.
Well, I think this is a question that's kind of split between myself and the commissioner, right? And remember, Io, when we first started this, and I said that we've been encouraging people to think differently, think bigger than what it is that we've been used to. So if you look into our consultative document that we did send out and talking about what the future of school, we talk about transportation. We talk about a dedicated bus system just for our students. We talk that could either be run by the Department of Education or by the Department of Transportation. So we're talking about having those types of resources in place. And so we're not talking about parents, of course parents can still drop their kids off, but we're also talking about reliable, dedicated bus services, whether it be minibus services that is run by the Department of Education or the like. But we're talking about these types of differences within our system because we have to provide our students with these opportunities, with these resources. And we cannot continue to depend on children making it to school if they manage to catch the bus. Those are the types of things. We need to remove those types of barriers to ensure that our children are there, our children are in school, our children are getting the resources. So we even talk about cafeterias within school. We talk about breakfast programs. We talk about lunch programs. We talk about those types of things. We talk about entities. We talk about resources within the school for parents and for the community to learn how to be to be to be different types of influences on our children. So when we talk about this, and I get excited about it, Io, because we're trying to get people to think differently from what we've always known to what is possible, and understand that if we think about what is possible, we will reach what is possible. And so, but I can pass it on to the commissioner, who can probably add on to that as well.
One more question just came in. So, Commissioner, if you can be brief, if you have anything to
I
add.
just wanted to say the other thing that why we needed the transportation service, when I talked about Bermuda being the outdoor classroom, we want our children to be able to go outside of the learning spaces to various parts of the island at any time during the school day year. So that fits in with the vision as well.
Awesome. With the impacts of COVID-19 and so many traumatic events in our community, this is from Facebook, there has been a commitment to the social emotional development of children in the redesign of schools. Can you speak to this, please?
I certainly can. I can indicate that the work and the thinking and the discussions and conversations around social emotional learning have started. And so we will continue to reach out to bring others, our critical stakeholders, into those discussions.
Great. So, okay, we're almost done. We're done. But can everybody, Tanya Stafford, can you give us your final thoughts before we go? And then the commissioner and then the minister. I'm going to ask the minister just to give some thoughts about the next steps and what's in the near future. Can we talk about when a decision is coming up? But first, Tanya, please.
Well, I think the questions have been brilliant. Thank you, everybody who's taken part. And this truly did feel like a conversation. And I think that's really what we need to have happen. And I would just say to everybody, stay with this, because Bermuda's children, they have the right to learn in good, safe, wholesome spaces. And I honestly do feel that the team that is surrounding education reform truly does want that. So stick with it, folks.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Just want to say education impacts everyone, children, their families, the community at large, and we really need everyone to rally around education reform, because it's being done because of what we want to provide for our children, a world-class education system.
Great. Minister, your turn.
I just want to thank everyone for coming out, and I want to reiterate some words that were spoken to me this morning. I met with four gentlemen who had some concerns about a particular parish in what was happening in there, and they handed me some documents. But I want to take away something that was said from one of the gentlemen. He's a former politician himself. He said, "Do not let politics govern what is best for our children. Our children deserve much more than that." And I'm in a very enviable position of making a decision that's going to impact the lives of our children that are not even born yet. The decisions that will govern what our school system will look like for generations to come. This is not something that I take lightly. It's something I take completely seriously. Now, you spoke earlier about, did you read all of the submissions? Yes, I did read the submissions, because this is something that has to be done, but it has to be done taking into account all of the things that we move forward with. I know when we passed the Education Amendment Act, which paved the way for the dissolving of primary schools, and you know, in my statement, I said then, and something to the effect of, if the decisions we're making today have to do with the re-election of me as a member of parliament in the position of Minister of Education, then I'm not making the decisions for the right reasons. The decisions have to be made because of what truly is what our children need. And this, I truly believe, is what our children need. So I just want to thank everyone who has supplied, who has tuned in today, supplied us with questions as we move forward, because together we're going to make a system that our children will benefit from, our children that are unborn will benefit from, and we will be a better country because of it. Thank you for everything.
Thank you very much. And to the audience, thank you so much for sending your questions. If you are watching the replay, keep the conversation going. We'll be watching that too. So to our special guest, Tanya Stafford, thanks a lot for coming. I know what time is it now? 11 o'clock in the UK?
Yep.
It's late. That's past your bedtime,
Anytime.
right?
Anytime.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Richards and Minister.
Thank
Do it
you.
again sometime soon, hopefully.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
All right.